All right. So I don't know if there's any new faces today who joined. If you were unable to attend yesterday, you can find the checkpoint that we're at from the email that Ur sent yesterday. So if you go in that email, let me see. Yeah, so this shared folder link. And then you can go into day one. And then we are here at checkpoint 3. So you can just download this file and continue from here. So where were we yesterday? Yesterday, we were able to make this loop work where we have the red particles which are flying around and then getting stuck and turning into blue particles. Now, the issue is that this can get a little bit too slow because we're going to run this multiple times. And we don't want these points getting lost all the way out here. So what we need to do is to prevent them from going all the way across the canvas, right? So what I want to do is I want to add a function here that's going to pull points back which are too far away. So basically it's adding another step to the flow of functions. Let's go to the slides. So the idea behind this is basically we're going to define a big circle, and we're going to say every time one of these particles moves outside the circle, they're going to be pulled back to the circle, and then they're going to keep moving. It's not going to make sure that they go back inside. Maybe they will keep trying to go outside, but it's random. So it's better that they do a random walk here rather than all the way out here. So it's like a small trick that's going to make the simulation a little bit faster. Yeah, so let's do it. So I'm going to first click on these and drag them to make some space here. And then I'm going to define a circle. So one of the things I have here is in the beginning, I have defined this boundary circle. This is where the points start, right? So I want this new circle to be a little bit bigger than this circle because I want it still to be random. And it could also be that this the stuck particles have grown. So I don't want them to meet the edge of the boundary very quickly. So I want to define a second circle here. I'm going to take this circle. Let's make a curve component. Let's call this initial circle. I put it in the beginning here. I'm going to alt click it, copy it, do this again, take it all the way here. I have my initial circle. What I can do is, should we do it like this? Let me think about it. Yeah, let's do it like this. We can use the component deconstruct arc. And put the circle here. And then we have the radius, the base plane, and the angle. The angle doesn't matter in this case because it's a circle, but we need the base plane and the radius. And then I'm going to make a new circle. So circle, click on the CNR. The center of it is going to be from the base plane. The normal of it is also going to be from the base plane. Grasshopper is quite smart in that this is a plane, but if you plug it into a point input, it will actually get the point from the plane. And it can also get the normal from the plane. So this is kind of handy for us. We can just enter the plane directly. And then we need the radius. So what I want to do here is I want to take this radius and multiply it by, let's say, 1.5, right? So I'll get a multiplication, multiply, make a slider 1.5 radius. So now I have a circle that's a little bit bigger, which is what I want. Then what I want to do is I want to take the points which are wandering around. So we have these wandering particles, right? I'm going to make a point component, plug this in, call it W particles again. Put it in here. And then I want to see if they are inside the circle or outside the circle. I forget the name of this component always. Does anyone remember the name of this component?
What are you looking for? Could you say it again?
It's the one that has, it finds the points in, oh, it's called point in curve, I think, yes. Yes, point in curve, this one. Okay. Curve. Point. So now I'm going to check if these particles are in this curve, right? Here I have this relationship output, and it tells me what it is. So 0 is outside, 1 is coincident, and 2 is inside, right? So I want the ones which are 0. So I'm going to say equals 0. So now I have a true or false pattern, right? So basically this true or false pattern is always what I need to sort out the points that I already have. So first I check, and then I check if this output is 0, and then I get if it's inside or outside. And then I'm going to use dispatch. And basically dispatch is going to look at this pattern, and it's going to separate the points to if they're inside or if they're outside, right? So let's go. So great. So this one is points that are outside. And you can see they're highlighted in green. And if I take this, put it here, then these are the ones that are inside. So I can do outside, and I can put inside here. So I know what they are. Then I want to bring these outside points back inside the circle. So the way I want to do this is I can do curve closest point. And take these curves, take these points, sorry, and bring them back onto this curve. And now basically all of these points which are outside are going to move to the closest point on this bigger curve. I hope that's clear. So they were here, these green ones. And now I click on this and they have teleported themselves all the way back to this curve. So now the next step that I want to do is I want to replace the old ones with the new ones. So let's think of a way how to do that, right? So we have our inside points and new outside points. What we can do is you can use probably the weave component, right? So the weave component takes 2 inputs and puts them back into 1 output. So it's the opposite of the dispatch component. The dispatch component splits them up with a pattern, and the weave component puts them back together with a pattern. So I'm going to use the same pattern. And then I'm going to take this point and these points. Now the weave, I'm actually not sure if it takes the the same, as in the list A actually goes in 0 or goes in 1, but we can check if our number of points is the same, right? So how many points did we have in the beginning? We had 273 points, and now in the end, we also have 273 points. And I'm going to turn all of these off. And if I click on this, I see that all of the points are within my circle, and all of these outside points are coming from our previous display. So this is what I wanted to do. So I'm going to make an output point, call it W point. We call it particles, right? Okay, so let's call it particles. And this is our output for the function. So I'm going to group this. And I will plug these W particles instead of the ones that we were using. So, okay, I'm going to save. And I'm going to run this again. Or let's pause here for a second. If has everybody gotten to this point? Or is...
We have a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Sana says that I didn't get why we can't use merge or entwine instead of weave.
That's a good question, actually. Very good question. You can use merge in this case. But, and it's of course easier to use merge because you don't need the pattern. But there are certain cases when you don't want to lose the order of these points, right? So for example, imagine an algorithm where you also need to make sure that each of these points, so if you go to point list, and if you, let's say, where's my points? So these are the numbers of the points, right? I want to make sure that the 230th point, when it goes back onto this curve, it stays as the 230th point, right? And that is what this weave does. I know that in this case, it doesn't matter because we don't really care which order the points come in, but you might come across an algorithm where you really need to make sure that every point stays as they are, because points might have different properties. Right now, they have no properties, right? They're just walking around. But if you have additional properties in the points, then you have to not lose track of them. And that's what the weave component allows you to do. Right, so if I look here, this is still the 230th point here. You're welcome. Okay, let's try to run this, see if it works. I'm going to turn this off again, the display. It does not work. Nice. So what's the issue? Yes, this was the issue. So we did the weave wrong, I believe. The outside, oops, no, it's crashing. Wait, okay. So we're doing something wrong here. Need to figure out what's being done wrong. Let's turn this off. So something is crashing here. Okay, I'm going to reset this. I'm going to try again. Let's see. Okay. So the issue was that the weave component and the dispatch component work differently in their list outputs, right? Here, from the dispatch component, the inside has to go into stream 0 and the outside has to go into stream 1. So that was the issue. So I hope no one crashed their computers. Alternatively, you could simply just use the merge component. Maybe that's actually a better idea in this case. I'm going to keep using the weave component. Does everyone understand what happened there? Okay. Okay, so it's working, right? So that's good. Let's try to play around with the limits of the algorithm a little bit. So I'm going to go here, make 400 particles, and I'm going to increase the maximum number of particles to 200. And then I'm going to increase the stick radius to 4, or even 5, actually. Let's do 5. And then I'm going to run this again. So what's happening here is that when we increase the stick radius to 4, the simulation grows very quickly, right? And the boundary that we selected here, this what we just did just now, this new circle, is not really big enough to contain all of the circles and still be a random walk, right? So the idea behind the DLA algorithm is that the particles have to be moving randomly. But if they're always at this boundary, then we're going to run into problems where this simulation is getting bigger and it just hits the boundary and then it's not random anymore. And the pattern on the outside does not look that nice, right? So ideally, what we want to do is, it would be great if this boundary could get bigger as our simulation also gets bigger. So that's going to be our next step. So right now we have this nice algorithm which creates a boundary circle, but the boundary circle is static, which means that if the simulation gets bigger, then it's going to hit the boundaries at some point. We can make the boundaries super large, but then the issue is there's no point in having a boundary if it's too large, because we already know that the particles are going far away, right? So the next step that I'm going to do is to add a boundary that moves with the simulation, all right? So here I'm going to have to cheat a little bit because I don't really remember how I did this. The best way to do this, which I'd found, was to see how far the points have gotten from the center, and then use that as the radius for our circle, right? So instead of just using 1.5, I want to use a value that's going to change throughout the simulation. So let's do that, right? So in addition to getting our wandering particles, I also want to input my stuck particles here. So I'm going to copy this, name it S particles, and take the S particles from here. Now, what I want to do is I want to see how far these particles have gone, right? How big is the simulation? So what I can do is I can make a point component and input this base plane into this point component. And what that does is it gets me the center point, because I know that this initial circle is centered in the middle, right? So this is my center point. And then I'm going to simply check the distances between these particles and this point. Turn this on. So simply distance, right? So here I have a list of distances. Now I want to sort these distances to see which one is the furthest away, right? So I can use the sort component. Now the distances have been sorted. I can also sort the particles here just to see which particle we have. And we can use list item. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to sort them from the lowest value to the highest value, right? So here I
Can
have
I ask something really, really sorry? Why
Yes.
why are we not taking walking particles but S particles for the distance?
Okay. So we're taking the S particles because well, firstly, we know where the walking particles are, right now. They are in the circle. And what matters is how far the walking particles go in relation to the stuck particles, if that makes sense, because it's the stuck particles configuration that changes the randomness of the simulation, right? So if you think about the stuck particles being very small here, we don't need such a big boundary. And if the stuck particles are big, then we need the bigger boundary.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. So here we have the values listed from the lowest distance to the highest distance. If I click on this and I click on reverse, then I get the point here, which is the farthest away from the center, right? So it reverses the list and gives me instead the biggest distance. I have to do the same here in keys. So if I make a panel here, I see the distances from the center of all of these points. It starts with 0. I'm going to click here and reverse, and I have the biggest distance. So I will again use a list item. And now I have my biggest distance, which is 50. So the same as we did before up here, we're going to copy this circle component. We can keep the normal and the center the same. We just change the radius. And now we have a circle with the radius with the largest stuck particle. However, we also don't want this, right? Because it doesn't make a difference. We need to make this slightly bigger than our biggest simulation. I know this might be slightly confusing, but I think you'll understand when we run the simulation after we're finished. So because I want the radius to be slightly bigger than what I have here, I'm going to again use a multiplication component and multiply it by, let's say, 1.2. And this I will put into this radius. So this is my new circle. It's what I wanted to have. It's slightly bigger than the blue particles. There's a lot going on, so I'm going to turn off all of these. Okay, so the extent of my blue particles comes until here, and I want my boundary to be slightly bigger, right? So that's great. So I have this. Now, I will group this so I know it's a different function. And then I will run this simulation again, and you're going to see something interesting, right? So you see this is the one that's dynamically growing, right? Let me run this again. So I click on it. So when the simulation is small, this circle is very small. And when the simulation gets bigger, it gets bigger, right? So that's kind of what we want, except this is also a little bit annoying, right? Because if we have the simulation very small, so let's run it here. So let's say the simulation is here, right? I kind of don't want my wandering particles to move all the way back down here. So kind of what I want to do is I want my wandering particles to use this circle when the simulation is small, but when the simulation is big, I want the circle to be dynamic. Does that kind of make sense? So in the beginning of the simulation, I like this circle. This is good. However, when the simulation gets big, the circle becomes too small. So that's when I need to use this dynamic circle, right? So how can we do that, right? It's actually quite easy. So we already have the circle, and we have this algorithm which is going to move the points closest to the circle. And this is one reason why I keep mentioning that we need to group our functions well, right? So here we actually made a mistake, and the mistake was we thought that this was one single function, but it's actually two functions, right? It creates a circle, and then it moves the points to that circle. Now I have a new circle. So how do I input this circle into this function, into half of this function? If we were smarter in the beginning, we would have separated these groups into two, and it would have been much easier, right? So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to select ungroup. And then I'm going to say, okay, here I have one function which creates a circle. That's this number one. And then I'm going to separate these out all the way here. And this is a second function. Okay. And we should also be clear about what the inputs and outputs are. So what is the input to this function? Well, it's taking the circle. So I'm going to make a curve component. I'm going to shift control click, and take both of these cables and put them in here. Add this to this group. And now I know there's an input here. What other input do we have? We have these points. We can bring this here. Okay, so this is a function in itself that takes in points and curves. I don't have to worry about it. I know what this does. I just need to change the input, right? So right now I have this input, and I want to have this input sometimes when this circle is big, right? So I just need to choose between this circle and this circle. So I need to make a choosing algorithm. And this I'm going to do by length. I'm going to say, let's take in two circles, curve 1 and 2, right? This. So this is going to be a function that takes in two curves, and it's going to check the length of these curves. It's going to compare the length. I'm going to say larger than. Actually, you know what? Let's not do it like this. Let's do this. Let's do a merge component. It's going to merge the lengths. So now I have a list of the lengths. I'm going to sort. And then I'm going to take the biggest one, right? So I'm going to merge the curves as well. Merge, merge. And I'm going to plug this result in here. And then I'm going to go with list item. Yeah. So to recap what we did here, this is a function that takes in two curves. It checks the lengths. It merges the lengths into a list, and it merges the curves into a list. It sorts them from smaller to bigger, and it chooses the smallest circle. We want the biggest circle, so we're just going to click here and say reverse. So now, if I keep this component clicked and I run the simulation, what happens? The circle switches, right? We had the biggest circle as the static circle, but then as the simulation got bigger, it chose the bigger circle, right? So now, this is my output that I want from this function, and I'm just going to plug it straight in here to this curve. Is it working? Let's save first. Save, run. The circle is getting bigger, and now the particles are allowed to go away from the circle. Okay, so this is our efficiency algorithm. Now it's finished, and this is also a checkpoint. Any questions?
Maybe I can add something here, because just to make it sense for the further step of this workshop, we should also take into consideration that these points that we are creating here is going to be some sort of guidance when we are creating our urban fabric. That's why also we want to make it efficient as possible in order to get the benefit of each point when we are creating our pattern or fabric or typology, however we call it. Otherwise, when we are creating, we are going to be creating a list of points, but then we are not going to be using some of them, which is not a very efficient way to, create something. Also, I think it's also important to take into consideration. So just to make sense for the further process.
Yep. Okay. Let's check what we have. So task 3 is completed. So I'm going to check what I have for my other checkpoints. They're probably material. So we had this, and then we have dynamic circle. Now we need the clustering. So this multiplication, I'm going to increase it slightly. 1.2 is a bit too small, I feel. So I'm going to go double click on it and make it 1.25. So you have to increase the digits to 2. I mean, you don't necessarily have to do this. It's just, this is how it was in our example files and checkpoints. So I just want to be consistent. 1.25. Okay, now we're going to talk about clustering. We talked a little bit about clustering before, but to recap again, so we want to cluster these components so that it looks better, right? We're not reusing them right now at this point, but I want to see clearly what my workflow is. So I'm going to start clustering them. And as I spoke about this before, if I have my inputs and outputs named here, and I cluster them, a middle mouse button, this box, or right click cluster, then the inputs and outputs will be named here. Yeah, and this is not named, unfortunately, because we forgot to name it, but we can just change it, of course. So we have here wandering particles. I'm still going to use the same colors here because I like those colors and they mean something to me. I understand when I see this blue, what it's doing. So we have cluster 1. This entire thing I'm going to cluster as well into one thing. Here it's a bit complicated, right? I'm not really sure what's going on here because we kind of did it quickly, but I think it's okay in this case. So let's try it and see what happens. Click all of it, right click, cluster. Okay, so our inputs were initial circle, S particles and W particles, and our output is W particles. Makes sense? I'm going to group this again. Nice. I'm going to pull this all the way back. And then we have our final cluster here, right click, cluster. Let's try to run this to make sure it still works. it works. Let's name the clusters. So this one was move wandering particles. And then I'm going to click on this use application settings to make sure you see it. Then here we have increase efficiency. And then here we have sticky. Nice. Okay, so this makes sense. I also want to do a group for this entire anemone. So I'm going to click here, all of these components, and I'm going to group them. And I'm going to make this some kind of gray color. So this helps me to see what's in the loop and what's not, right? It also helps me to see if I'm inputting something into the group, I know where they are. So I know that this loop is going to take these components as inputs. Okay, let's save. Now, one of the things that we're missing in this state right now is the randomness, right? So we said we want random generations every time. However, if you have noticed that every time we run, we gain the same exact configuration. So if I run this to 186, let's see what we get. Okay, so we get something that, for example, has no points here at the lower part, right? I'm actually going to take a screenshot of this, perhaps. And I'm going to copy paste it in Paint, the best app ever. And then I'm going to repeat it. And I'm going to check if it's the same. And it's exactly the same, right? So now I know that this simulation, every time we run it, is going to produce exactly the same result. So what we're using to create the randomness is, if we go into this cluster, it was this random generator, right? And it was taking the seed from this iteration. Now here, there's an issue because we come to a point where my knowledge isn't good enough to explain to you why a random number generator with a counter does not always generate random numbers. I mean, it makes sense because we're using the same seed, but the point is, if you use a Python component to generate the random numbers, it will actually generate a random number differently every time. So this is the workaround that I found here, and that means that we're going to have to write some code, one line of code, and it's the only way I found to create an actual random number. If you have any suggestions here, please share them with me, and I'd be happy to hear them. But as it stands, I was unable to find any other way to do this. So yeah, let's get into some coding. I mean, not some coding, it's just going to be one line, but we can try it out. So right click, or not right click, and let's get a Python component, Python script. Okay, so the input is iteration, output is all random. So are you guys familiar with using these Python scripts? Okay. So I'm going to input this random number, this iteration, sorry, the counter, into I iteration. And then I'm going to right click, type hint, it's an integer. So I go in First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import the random. I believe, was it math random? Okay, I think I'm going to have to cheat because I haven't used Python in a long time. Let's cheat. Yeah, okay, we import random, so that's number one. Test. Oops. Test, it works. Okay, so we imported random. Then we're going to say random number. So we create a new variable equals random dot, and then it gives us what this random library offers us in terms of its functions. And we're going to use rand range 0 something. So what this is doing is it's generating a random number for us between 0 and 50,000. I'm going to press enter and let's say print random number, right? See what we get. So I'm going to test and I got a random number. If I test again, every time I get a different random number. This is okay. Then I have here my output variable. It's called orandom. So I'm going to say orandom equals random number. Test. It doesn't do anything because we didn't print it. And I'm going to say, okay. Now I'm going to create a panel and check what I have, and I have a random number. Yesterday, we talked about one of these YouTube tutorials with Louis, and it was a tutorial that was made by Long Nguyen, and he always recommends to have inputs and outputs separated with an I and an O, right? So my input is I iteration, and my output is O random. So here, if I had a bigger script, it would be very clear which one is the input and which one is the output. So it's just good practice to name your variables in a way that you understand where they are, just as a tip. And then I'm going to put this, add this to the group, and I'm going to use this random number as the seed to my existing algorithm. So I just replace the iteration with this random number. So let's run. And hopefully we get something different than our previous paint generated. So we had this, and now we get something completely different, which is what we want. And if we run it again, I don't have to show you, it's going to be different. So this random script is saving us. Now I'm going to save and quickly explain something. So obviously we're not using this number, right? This number is coming in from the counter in the iteration, but in the code, we're not using the I iteration. Why is that? Because basically these Python scripts, every time it gets a new input, it runs again, right? So we're using a property of these Python scripts in Grasshopper to hack almost the system. So we're creating a random number every time this input changes. So in reality, we're not actually using this iteration input. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so we have our randomness now, which is nice. I'm going to save this again. And then let's check what our next step is. Initial configurations. Okay. So basically, I showed to you guys before what we did here was that we had a line, and if the particles got stuck to the line, then it would grow in this kind of formation, right? So we're going to do that. Instead of starting with with a single point. We're going to start this time with a line or with random points, with many different points. You can do whatever you want actually here.
Before you start, do you think it would be a nice spot to give a small break, because almost we're heading to an hour? Maybe like
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Because it's, I think, a nice spot to, you know, give a 5-minute distance, and then it would be nice to go back and start from something from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any questions before that, and then we can do it? Is it somewhat clear? Okay. All right. Then.
Okay, do we call it like in Laon, like 8 minutes break, and we start at the next hour? Okay.
All right. All right. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. So what we were saying is we have our initial point here, which always makes sure that we're growing from the center, right? But we could create different configurations if we start with different boundary conditions, different starting conditions. And here you can kind of do whatever you want technically. Initially, our idea was to have 3 different options, but we can talk about, we can talk about that further in the next section. I'm just going to show you how to do start from a line, for example, instead of a point, and also start with multiple random points, and then maybe run a few simulations to get an idea of how that changes things. So let's start with a line, right? So I think the easiest way to do this is just to say curve in Rhino and just draw a Rhino curve. Make it kind of interesting like this. Enter, and we have this nice curve. I'm going to take this curve into Grasshopper. Right click, set one curve, okay. And then I'm going to, again, use this divide curve component to create points out of the curve. So divide curve. How many points do we want? We can just do 10 for now. Or maybe, yeah, let's make sure they're closer. So let's do maybe 15. You can even automate, make this automatic. Actually, let's do that. So depending on the length of the curve, we're going to have different number of points, let's say. So let's take the length of the curve. And let's divide this by 3. 11, so we need 11 points. Alternatively, you can also just use the divide length component, right? If you go divide length, then here put 3. Basically, you get points every 3 units. This is probably the best way to do it, actually. So let's just use divide length. Okay, so now I have my points. So instead of this single point that I would give it normally, I'm going to give all of these points, right? So what I can do is I can do, again, Control-Shift-Click, put it here, and then save, and try again, and let's see what we get. Okay. Not great. What happened? Okay, I know what happened. Where is our starting circle? Interesting. I don't know what's happening actually. Let's try to make this curve a little bit smaller first. Interesting. So when I input multiple points, the algorithm is not working. So I need to go and debug this. Try to figure out what's going on, right? Let's see. So we're witnessing a real-time debugging procedure. That's interesting. Let's see what's going on. If we can't figure out, then we can just go to the checkpoint. So I'm entering 400 points and I'm getting 800 output particle points, right? Oh, chat. Yes, it must be a graph issue. And it is probably because there's multiple S particles, the structure, the graph structure of the W particle is messing up. I'm going to try to debug it. I mean, let's see, let's go through this together. If it doesn't work, then we can go through the checkpoint. So let's look in here and see what we got. Okay. So the W points are starting out as a tree. I wonder if flattening the W points as we are entering them is going to solve the problem. We can try it. Let's try it. Save and close. I'm going to save, and I'm going to right-click, flatten. Run again. No, didn't help. This could be the issue. Let's see. I don't think the issue is here, because here we just choose a boundary circle, so that's probably fine. And here we get the same number of particles that we input as an output, so that's totally fine. I think that's good. Let's take a look in here. All right, I actually have no idea. I will take a look at this as Uğur does his presentation afterwards. And for now, I think let's just continue from the checkpoint because I really have no idea what's going on.
I think we can say that when we're modeling complex systems, the bugs are getting complex as well.
Yeah, exactly. And ideally, clustering them after changing the inputs would probably have been a better idea, because that allows us to debug a little bit faster. Yeah. Exactly. All right, let's go from the checkpoint. So checkpoint 6, initial configurations.gh. I will have them here. Okay. So here it's great because we already have all of these different starting configurations. So I'm just going to explain to you what I was doing here. So it's the same idea, right? So we have our starting point here. Let me delete this curve. So this is how it would start normally with 1 point, but instead now we have 2 different possibilities. We have the starting curve, which is a curve that I drew in Rhino, just like we did just now. This kind of curve, and then divide length to provide these different points as the start to the simulation. And then the second option is starting points. So let me do this. So here I start with 3 different random points and see how that affects, right? So these 3 options. Finally, this would have been the next step. So this is a component called stream gate. Oh, sorry, stream filter, right? And what stream filter does is basically it takes in different inputs and it takes in this gate component. And here, this gate is controlled by this slider. So I'm going to take the slider over here and plug it into gate, right? And then I will say geometry and take this. So if I have this slider at 0, then the starting point comes into 0, and this stream filter takes the 0 and outputs it as the output. So we have here a geometry 0. If I go to 1, then it will output this, which is input into 1. And if I go to 2, then it will output these starting points, right? Okay, and we have this connected to this slider here. So the checkpoint file is well organized because it has all of the parameters well defined in this box, right? So basically all of the things that we've been talking about are defined in this box as parameters. We have the sticking radius, the particle speed, the maximum number of stuck particles, and this initial configuration slider, which changes the initial configuration. Everything else is the same. So I'm going to quickly show you, for example, what happens if we start with 3 points instead, right? I'm going to save this as a separate file first. Okay, I'm going to enable this and disable these. Yeah, so here I start with 3 points, and as you can see, the middle of the simulation is going to be empty, right? And this can create very interesting configurations in the next step, because everything that happens here is going to have some sort of effect in the urban pattern that you're going to be creating, right? So if you start, for example, with 3 random points, then you might have an urban pattern with like a space in the middle, which could be something interesting. Or let's start with a curve, for example. Let's change this initial configuration to 1. And here, basically, we already start with a set kind of directionality to the simulation. So this helps have us some control. Although in the end, after it grows, it kind of already resembles a random structure. However, the initial kind of linearity is still somewhat visible. Yeah, so that's the initial configuration idea. I'm going to save again. Is there any questions here?
I do have a question.
Yes.
Is it? I mean, don't you? I've looked at other DLA simulations, and I've noticed that very often the particles are stuck together in a. I mean, they are touching each other. In this case, we are just stopping a moving particle when it is within the radius of a stationary particle.
Mm-hmm.
But if we keep things this way, we will end up with a gap between the stationary particle and the moving particle. And I think that in other implementations, they are trying to place the moving particle right next to the stationary particle. They are placing them in such a way that they are touching. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes sense, but at some point you still have to define the size of the particle, right? So, for example,
Right.
if I do a CNR and I take this radius here and I take this, oops. So technically, the particles are only touching if you define your radius in a certain way, right? I guess what I'm trying to say is, what's the difference between defining a particle radius and then saying that it's touching, as opposed to having
I mean,
know what I mean?
for example, yeah, what I mean is that here you are using circles, and obviously some circles are overlapping. What if we want to have something where no circle is overlapping?
Ah, okay, okay. I
You know,
understand what you're
to
saying.
have some nice expansion of the branchings, you know, without overlapping.
Okay, I understand what
I
you're
mean,
saying.
if it's not important to the later steps, it's okay. I was just curious because other simulation you see very nice placement of the circles.
Okay, okay. No, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, in this case, yeah, it's not that important, but I also haven't done the simulation in that way, so we would have to think about how to do that.
Okay. I just thought that maybe using the kangaroo component, there is a nice component for moving circles away from each other, and just in a signal component, you have some nice placement.
Although if I were to do the simulation like that, then I would probably want to stick the particles initially in the correct way rather than do it post with kangaroo.
Right.
But yeah, I see your point. Yeah, no,
okay,
good point. All right. Okay, so this, as it is right now, is the algorithm that we're going to use in the next step. However, because we want to use it in combination with the Wallacei algorithm, this loop is going to create problems for us, because this loop component does not run simultaneously with Wallacei. So that's why Anemone has provided us with a fast loop component, right? So the slow loop is every time I run the loop, I see the results of each step, right? And the fast loop, what the fast loop does is it runs the entire loop as a component at one go. So it will do every calculation and every step in itself, and then it will just output simply the result, right? So we're going to have to copy this loop and reconnect all of these wires as the fast loop, right? So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to save. I'm going to move this guy down. Or actually, let's do it like this. Let's keep this here. And let's do a scribble component. Maybe 40. And call it slow loop. Okay. I'm going to copy, Control C. And then actually, instead of copying and pasting right now, I'm going to first right click on this and disable it so that it doesn't automatically start running. And then I will Control C, Control V, and move it down. And call this fast loop. All right. Then I will bring in my fast loop start and my fast loop end. So the fast loop doesn't need a button anymore because it will just run like a component. It basically becomes a Grasshopper component, and Grasshopper components run automatically every time you put them onto the canvas, right? So there's no trigger. There is iterations. So let's put this here, iterations, and then there's data. So I'm just going to press plus, add a new data, and basically just Control Shift, click, and just drag the data and the D1 over here. And then I'm going to drag again all of these inputs and outputs back into this component. I'm going to disable it first, just so to make sure it doesn't run. By the way I'm disabling is I'm right clicking and pressing this, right? Or you can right click on the canvas and there's disable. But if you just use the keyboard and press D, it will disable it fast, right? So you can also use the keyboard for that. So I drag, I rename this as points. Discovery points. And I add it to the group, add to group, right? Now I need to do the same here at the end. So I'm going to add a data. I'm going to drag, rename this as points. Rename this W points. It's here. Okay, now I'm going to save and try to run this. Let's see what happens. Right click, enable. My computer freezes. And it runs, right? So I'm going to turn this display off, display preview off. Here as well, display preview off. And basically what happened is it ran in the background, my computer froze for 3-4 seconds, and it finished the simulation and it output the output of the simulation. And it's doing exactly what the slow loop is doing, but it's doing it at one go, right? And this is what we're going to need for the optimization. It's important to make sure that the slow loop is working perfectly before copying it to the fast loop, because it's really difficult to debug the fast loop because you don't see all of the steps. So it's much easier to debug the system in the slow loop. And then once it's finished, and hopefully it is finished, and then you can copy and paste it into the slow loop. One of the things you'll notice is, I mean, you'll also notice it in the slow loop, that when you have the sticking radius at a higher value, then the simulation will run much faster because the particles are going to be able to get stuck much easier, right? And also if you increase the particle speed. So those kinds of things will make a slight difference between how fast it runs. And of course, your computer's speed is also going to make a difference, but I think Uwe is going to talk more about that in the next step. For now, I'm going to delete these old slow loop components, add this onto this group, delete this one, save, and that's it. So this is the algorithm we're going to have and use for the next steps. So we're done. If there is something wrong, again, you can just go and get this final DLA checkpoint. Yeah, other than that, I think we're done for this first part. Are there any questions?
I think it would be nice if at that moment we have a general discussion about the first part, like from the participants having some sort of feedbacks. I mean, it would be nice for you guys to join and say, what were you expecting and did you find what you're looking for? Or is there any confusions or is there any thoughts that you want to share? This is a nice time to do that.
Mm.
Also, I'm wondering, is there anyone who has, before this workshop, previously worked on this agent-based modeling? Or this is the first time that you are creating some sort of, let's say, script in that, let's say, mindset? Because it would be hard to ask questions or have some confusions if you're first time dealing with that kind of things. But if you already work with this kind of agent-based tools, then you might have deeper questions, I guess. Yes, thank you again. Says my first time.
Yeah, maybe I can say something.
Sure.
It's my first time with agent-based modeling, but I have basic Python understanding. I have the Grasshopper understanding, so it was easy to follow it for me. The pace is, I think, really good. It's a compact, and if we were to made it in a school environment, I believe, with a lot of students and with the setting and everything, it will be much slower. So I think I found what I was looking for. It was a good recap for me. And I learned a lot of tips and tricks from Ridwan. So as far as we got to the point now, it was good for me. Thank you.
Happy to hear.
Looking forward to the next steps.
Well, I hope I will get this kind of comment as well.
If I may, I will also, I share the point of view of Ege. I also have some experience in coding and scripting growth algorithm and some experience with Grasshopper, and I found the pace of this workshop really well adapted. I have participated in other workshops in previous years, Digital Futures and also other platforms, and very often the pace, the rhythm is not good. It's too either too fast or too slow. But I found it's really honestly the first time that I found the pace to be perfect. At least for me, from my point of view. I also really like the introduction with all the theoretical aspects, the references to Bill Hillier and other authors. Really interesting, and not too long and straight to the point. So it was really perfect to me. So a massive thank you.
Thank you. No, it's really, I'm so happy to hear that, because it's also our first workshop. I mean, this is the first time we do this, so it's great to hear this feedback.
Also, we have a comment in the chat if you can see.
Yeah. Sana says it was interesting for her, for him, for them. Yeah. Ant colony as well. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, maybe you and Louis could talk, because Louis, you wanted to ask about the ant colony simulations, or was that termites nest?
Actually, I found yesterday the post I was talking about. It is a picture from an architect from the AA called named Spiropoulos. I don't know if you know him, Spiropoulos. I don't know what his first name is. And he uses I can later send a picture. He uses an ant colony algorithm to build a nest, and which is quite interesting, because usually the ant colony algorithms are used to move some food from one place to another. But in his case, he revert the algorithm in some way, I believe. And instead of grabbing some food and moving into another place, he changed the behavior to placing some stuff to deposit things on the screen. And from that simple behavior, he can build a really nice looking nest. But it's quite difficult to explain with words, and especially with my broken English. So if people are interested, I can send a picture with a rough explanation of what's going on.
Yeah, please. If you can send in the chat, I would be interested in that.
Sure.
Maybe one thing to add, the agent-based modeling stuff. I mean, as you've noticed, our agents are very simple. They're not doing anything, right? They're just moving around and getting stuck. And in simulations like the one you were just talking about with the ant colony, the agents actually have properties, and they have behaviors, and that's more like the actual agent-based modeling. In the case of DLA, it's like the minimum of what agent-based modeling can do. So that's also maybe important to say. And then one thing I wanted to test, Louis, because you made me curious now, with the sticking radius, right? I'm curious if I reduce the particle speed to a very slow speed, which is not good for our purposes, because we need to run fast simulations. But I believe that what you're saying with the radius is not overlapping would not happen if the speed was slow enough, right? Because yeah, tell me, like, I'm just thinking through this right now. The reason why the radius is overlapping is because a particle moves into one of the radiuses too quickly, right? If it was slow enough, then it would get stuck before it could really move into the personal space of another particle.
I agree.
So at the limit of very small movement speeds, or if you have a lot of fast iterations, then I think this algorithm would probably do the same. Or?
No, I agree. It's clever. Okay.
So I think if, like, running a very smooth DLA algorithm, you would probably have to reduce the particle speed to 0 point something, and hopefully increase the amount of iterations it can do. And in that way, you can have a very smooth algorithm where the moment it touches the radius, it's going to get stuck. And then you have the actual no overlap. In our case, though, with Grasshopper, I think it's at least in the next step, like with the iterations and the simulations and stuff, it's just way too slow to do that. Yeah.
I think also it's always the case when we are working in this kind of modeling tools, we are not quite sure what result we're going to get with the initial values. Then we need to try some values and go back and try again, and until we get the result that we're looking for, because that was also the case in our practice, right? First we tried with some random parameters with sticking radius and particle speed and everything. Then we have to make a lot of practices and then go back and learn what we got from there, and then start over everything again. And sometimes you think really you get the exact, let's say, parameters that you're looking for. But in this case, let's say in the optimization part, maybe the whole process is not fast enough. So you have to go back, change the speed. But then this time, maybe, I don't know, number of stuck particle is not enough or too much. Then we need to do everything again and again, find the right balance until we get something. So we need to do a bit improvising, I guess, in this case. And also, I think we need to also emphasize the importance of, I mean, you already talk about it, like why we need the fast loop in the optimization part, but also right now when we are at this point, I would like to deepen that topic a bit, because when we start to optimize something, it's, I don't know if you guys have worked with Wallacei or some other evolutional algorithm tools. We're gonna talk about it in the next phase, but whenever you change a parameter, I mean a slider or gene value, then you're getting a fitness value, which is like the goal that we want to minimize or maximize. And in the slow loop, since we have, let's say, 200 repetition, in each repetition, we're going to have a fitness value, which is going to crash at the end our whole process, or it will make it much more harder to optimize. That's why we want our procedure to be like between 0 and 1. Having a result is 1 and starting is the 0 point. So that's why the fast loop is much better in this case when we are dealing with the optimization algorithms. So, so any other comments or interesting examples? By the way, I checked the chat, Louis, thank you. It seems super interesting. That's what you have shared. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So in this case, I mean, we can either start the second phase, or, I mean, normally we were planning to give a bigger break in the middle, but we can either give it now, like maybe 20 minutes, and then start the second phase, or we can start the second phase immediately and we can give a break in the middle of it. So it really depends on you guys. What do you think about it? How do you prefer?
And even maybe like 30 minutes for lunch, if people want to have lunch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Doesn't matter for me.
All right. What about the others? Would you like to have a longer break or a small portion of breaks? We can even maybe finish earlier if we give less breaks. So it depends on you. We have comments and chats. Either way is fine.
Noor says, we can have a 20-minute break now.
Okay. I think it's going to be better. We can put some distance between two phases.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's call it a 20 minutes break then. And in the next hour, we will start the second phase of our workshop. Yeah, okay.
All right.
See you.
See you.
Guys.
So, has everyone come back from the break? We're going to start in a minute for the second phase, just to make sure we're not missing anyone. In the meantime, let me configure my presentation. Okay, can you guys see my presentation right now? Can anyone?
Yes.
Okay, nice. So let's not waste more time and get started for the second phase. Before we start, I want to mention that, like in the first part, whenever you have some questions, just feel free to pause me and jump into directly anytime that you have something unclear. Or if you want to make any comments, or I don't know, just to make sure everyone free to jump whenever you want. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Louis. Well, for the second, let's first have a look at the summary, what we are going to have in this remaining 1.5 day. First, we're going to start with an introduction part, which is right now. We're going to have a, actually in the previous, in the next slide, I think I have a detailed explanation. Okay. Just a sec. Yeah, so first we will start with an introduction part where we are going to dive into terms and concepts of generative design, genetic algorithms, and evolutionary design tools, some of the projects and research, mostly from industry. Just a sec, I'm having a problem with my screen. Okay. And then I will also share one of my projects, which has been developed with 2 of my colleagues during my master period, also for my thesis. And then we will go with the second part of our, let's say, phase 2, which is diving into Grasshopper. But we will give a break to the DLA algorithms in this phase. We will start with a very basic example in order to understand the basics of the optimization tools, which is Wallacei in this case. We will dive into the interface of the Wallacei first. We will see like the tabs and all the features that program have, that software have, and then we will run a very basic algorithm with this already made example, which is in our drive folder. I'm going to show you the folder and where it is when we get there, and which is based on the Barcelona Superblocks. I mean, it's a kind of, let's say, not the identical thing, but more or less has the similar idea with them. Probably you already know and heard a lot of about it before. And next day, which is I hope in the beginning of next day, we will go back to the DLA algorithm, and this time we will get from where Rıdvan left, and then we will continue with an integration where we start creating our first urban typology. And then with the information that we have from today, we're going to also integrate it with the optimization tool. And then we will have our phenotypes. And then after having our phenotypes, we will, of course, visualize them and evaluate and discuss. And at the end, if we are satisfied with the results, we are going to maybe try another typology, or if we are not, we can every time go back and try with a different, so let's say, settings. In this case, it's called genes, but we will get to that. So if there is any question about the overall, let's say, scheme of the remaining part of the workshop, let's start with terms and concepts. So in order to dive into optimization, first we need to understand what is the generative design. And then when we are diving into a concept, it's always good to check the linguistic definitions first. So in this case, generative is first term, which is having the power of function, as you can see, of generating, originating, producing, or reproducing. So in this case, reproducing is, let's say, an important term, because it has a meaning that covers the generative design idea. So what it means, like, generative design has different explanations. Here I carried three different definitions. As you can see, one of them says it's a design exploration process, or it's a iterative design process involving software generally, and which generates a certain number of outputs meeting specified constraints. And one of the other definitions says it's a software-driven iterative design process. So we can see that the common point is the generative design needs a process. It's either an exploration process, or it's a, let's say, an iterative process where we generate different kind of designs. So if we think about the architectural side of the generative design, we can say that a designer normally, in a certain amount of time, capable of creating certain amount of design options, right? It really depends on the scale and also the stakeholders that dive into this process, but generally, architectural design is a complex and tidy process that needs to take some time. And at the end, we are not able to sometimes create more than a couple of proposals. But in generative design, a designer using the computer as a manual design tool, I mean, in this case, it has a limitation. But a computer can generate hundreds or even thousands of alternatives thanks to AI algorithms, and with the unlimited power of cloud computing features. So this is a very popular image. Probably you have seen 1,000 times, which when you type generative design on the Google, I think this is the first image that comes. But there is a reason, because it explains the term very well. It's almost like you get emotion when you look at this picture, let's say. We can see that from top of the picture to the below part, we have a sequential image, which is like, when we perceive, let's say, the movies, normally we see 24 frames in a second, right? Normally it's not moving, but we have the sense of an image that is moving. It really looks like this. It's starting from somewhere and almost like moving to the other part. And in the meantime, it's not static, it's changing. It has this process in this image. I think that's why this image is used a lot. It really shows that process in itself. And I'm not sure what kind of part or I don't know tool this is. This is from probably a part of a machine from a Siemens product. And you can see in the first product, when we have a massive amount of material, it goes little by little to something much lighter. And in this case, probably they have the same strength, they have the same durability, or something like this. So the main idea in generative design to explore, have this process, and let's say increase the efficiency. And of course, this is also useful in architecture, because we might have, while using our aesthetic or approach in our projects, we can increase our economical or sustainable, I mean, economical can also be sustainable, but I mean the environmental or building physics efficiency with very minor changes. In this case, generative design is a very useful tool. Okay, and in the other part, we have another term which is called genetic algorithms. Of course, we know what genetic is. It relates, like, let's say, well, in the definition, it says relating to or determined by the origin, development, or causal antecedents of something. We know what makes us we is the genes that we have, what determines our characteristics and everything. Also in design, it's the same thing. And on the other hand, the algorithm is way for solving a mathematical problem. And genetic algorithm is a bit complex to understand from the definition. As you can see, it says meta-heuristic inspired by the process of natural selection that belongs to the larger class of evolutionary algorithms. But don't worry about it. Well, now we will dive into the details for each step, and it will be much easier to understand what it means. So this is, let's say, a thing that we all know from the biology, right? This is a simple chart, or let's say a diagram that shows the natural selection. And of course, it always starts with a generation, and then throughout the evolution, each individual has a selection period, and some of them get selected in this period, based on some criteria. And then the ones that are selected, which are the survival ones, have a chance to reproduce. And in this reproducing, generally there will be a mutation, and with this mutation, a new kind of species can occur sometimes, and sometimes it is even close to a better generation that has previously survived, because it is a kind of a let's say luck factor in this case. We heard a lot of stories when we are studying in biology. Let's say color could be also decisive factors in terms of surviving, living, or dying for a species. So in general, the genetic algorithm is the mimicking what we have in the nature, in the natural selection. And evolutionary algorithm can be also referred as genetic algorithms, because it's the same, like it's inspired by the natural selection as well. And a genetic algorithm is a kind of optimization algorithm, which is we can't say it's a sublayer of generative design, but it has the same understanding. In generative design, it doesn't have to be let's say evaluate in a natural selection, but we can define our kind of parameters. But here it's a bit more like what happens in the nature itself. So, of course, there are steps in any genetic algorithms, and the first one is the initialization. And each individual or design option in the population is a potential solution to overall design problem, right? For example, in this image, we have a turtle which has a length for its legs, and a neck width, skin color, shell, anything. So anything it has is actually a response to the nature, and everything in this initialization phase that will help it to either survive or disappear when it comes to a, let's say, evaluation process. So a genetic algorithm always begin with a set of potential solutions, and in this case we have a, you can see almost like a slider. When we implement this to grasshopper canvas, we will going to have a very simple, very similar kind of application. We're going to define limits for our initialization phase. Maybe it will be, let's say, a plot size when we are defining our urban parameter, and we will have a certain amount of capacity to move in between these setups. And also it's important that in this variation size, there should be enough search space, because otherwise there is a little chance to have a good evolution. Which means that if we stuck on a very narrow, let's say, curve, then of course we are going to have a better generations in the meantime, but it might not give us to result that we are actually looking for. So when we dive into practices, it will be more meaningful if there is confusions in these stages. And the second step is called evolution. So to reaching our goals, of course, we need some indicators that proves our design is evolving, right? Which in this case, for example, you can see as a fitness criteria, combat is selected, and each, let's say, generations in here have different combat skills, and all of these skills are going to be evaluated by the nature, and there will be a threshold value, and under that value, everything will be eliminated. So the optimization, the genetic optimization algorithm is going to do the same. The fitness function is essentially an objective function for genetic algorithm here. And this is the thing that we either want to maximize or minimize in our design, because in optimization, in evolutionary optimization or genetic optimization tools, we can either maximize a fitness value or we can minimize. So we don't have any other options. And a fitness function is used to evaluate how close or far of a design solution is meeting from our goals, right? Yeah, this is the next step, which is called selection. As we mentioned, you can see there is a survival threshold, and everything is under this threshold is while everything is under this threshold alive, everything up are going to be dead. So this is how it works in nature, and how it works in algorithm is the same. The, let's say, options that are not meeting with this threshold value are not going to be evaluated in the next generations, and the ones that we have under or maybe in this case, in our case, can be reverse. I don't know, but you get the point. Like we have an aim, and the ones that are meeting with those criteria will survive, and then we will have a better generation. Okay, and then we will have a like a breed phase. Each of these better generations will start to crossover with each other in the next phase, which is already called crossover, or with others say reproduction phase. So crossover can be very complex, but at a basic level, two parent solutions are selected to breed with each other, and some proportions of each parents features are selected or swapped, you know, crossover with each others in order to create something new. Not the solutions are going to be based on the parents, but of course they are not going to be identical, right? Because they will have different genes from different two parents, and we will have something new, and which is going to be something, let's say, better in this case, because this is going to be a part of our evolution, and it's going to be meeting with our criteria more and more when we have generations. When we have generations after the crossover reproduction phase. And the final step is called mutation, of course, like we speak. And here the randomness is introduced to algorithm, which means that you know, with mutation, certain offspring are subject to random mutations at each crossover, meaning that some of their traits randomly change and are not inherited from their parents. This is why important, because with adding some luck to the algorithm, we might be able to survive from stacking from our own algorithm, because sometimes when we define a search space and we define some parameters, the machine obviously stuck in some certain search limits, and this is not what we want, right? We want to have we don't want to close all the options in a very quick phase. Maybe after a certain amount of evaluation, then we will know, okay, our search space is in this direction. We know that already because we tried, let's say, in 2,000 iterations. But in very, very early stages, if we close that door, then we might never have the some of the useful solutions that we are going to use in our design, in our evolutionary design. So in this case, the mutation helps us to you know, not to stuck in this search space, and it gives a bit of luck, adding some randomness to the function, and yeah, this also helps us to evolve our design. So before moving on to the projects, I would like to ask, is anything confusing there, or everything is clear at that moment? Because this is the let's say, the basic understanding what the genetic algorithm and how the optimization workflow runs. Okay, I'm not sure I can see the chat. Okay, I can see the chat. Yeah, thanks, Louis. Okay, so we're gonna look at some of the interesting projects that I bring. I think it's gonna be also interesting for you if you haven't seen them before. So this is a generative design, let's say, a research and the project. It's a kind of research project done by Autodesk and another stakeholder, which I can't remember the name. But anyway, it's a residential neighborhood project in Alkmaar. And this is the general scheme of the project. You can see in a generative design process, first, of course, we should have data, right? Because in order to create, I mean, in each design phase, we first need some data. It can be either some regulations or it can come from client. It can be anything, but we need a starting point. So like, you know, constraints and requirements, as in this case, how it's written. And once we have the data, we come up with a solution, right? Which is the generation process. In a let's say, conventional design process, it's also same. Anyway, and then after we generate a solution, we have a chance to evaluate sometimes in a conventional way, but sometimes as we speak, it's not always the case because of the time and efficiency. But in generative design, it's much more simpler. So we have in this case like a chart. Also in one of the tools we have let's say real-time chart that shows our fitness criteria, and we can evaluate very easily. And after we evaluate our design, the genetic algorithms helps us to evolve our design and go back to our generation process, and then we can play with our starting points after we created our, let's say, iterations. Then we can say, okay, if we go back to the beginning and start to play with some of the constraints, maybe we can have a better result because we had a evolution and we created some generations. We already learned something about the design, and we proved that with many iterations, and then we can start over everything and go back, generate again, and rerun the circle again. And once we are satisfied with let's say the final generation, then we can select and also transform it to a manual design process as well, because generally we don't directly use what we have from this tool, right? I mean, in some cases maybe, but in architectural design, I mean, it's not, we are not there yet, let's say. We need to evaluate everything also as designers, because it's not just about efficiency, also it's about other considerations as well, right? So anyway, in this project, you can see this is the first part where they first outline the site and then putting some constraints in order to develop the algorithm. You can see like in one part in the, I guess in the north, yeah, it's we can see in the bottom where is north, where is south. So in the north part of the site, so you can see it's divided from the almost from the middle. In the north part of the site, they said that maybe you can also see my mouse. I'm not sure, but we had a fancy laser tool. Okay, you can see the mouse.
There was a laser tool somewhere. I forgot how I.
Yeah. It was cool. I was also hoping to use it.
But mouse is okay. People can see it.
Okay, you can be the fancy one. Okay, so you can see here it says 3 floors are the max, and in the bottom part it says 5 floors maximum. And also they give some decisions about the house orientations and green buffer areas and everything. So you already start thinking about the design process. I mean, you have to think about the design process. You have to give some decisions in the beginning. And then you have to have these, let's say, rules as well. For example, here you can see about the parking lots, they have some constraints like 5-meter radius circles are drawn here. And then also have some rules for the housing, like how they are going to be oriented, where the solar panels will be, and how the walking path is going to be placed, and with which kind of dimensions it's going to be constructed. And some other rules as well, right? So we don't have to go all through. So just to understand the point. Okay. Of course, after we define a set of rules, we also need to know how they are going to be located in the site as well. So I think the fun part in the generative design is also thinking about the possible approaches that we can generate to our design solution, because we have the site and we have some rules, but we can maybe with 100 difference of variation, we can also apply these rules to our site. For example, in this case, you can see in the first part, they subdivide into some boundaries, almost like grids. and then they generated some streets, and then we see that they are putting the buildings inside the plots. So this could be, I mean, this is of course nice implementation. We can see a lot of thoughts behind it, but it could be something completely differently. You could start with placing your buildings, then you could divide your area based on the locations of your building, and then you could have the streets or whatever. You can shuffle all these steps when you are approaching to site. I think it's really depends on the important factor of your design. And then, of course, we see the place of the apartment building units in the fourth phase, and then allocating the program, right? And then we see the fitness values that will be the decisive factor, I mean, the indicator for our design, right? I mean, in this case, not our, but the design itself. So you see that solar gain, program, and profits, project costs, backyard size, and variety, these are all fitness values going to be represented in the chart, and also in the genetic algorithm. It will be the let's say the factor that defines if either these generations going to survive or not, and it will also show how the generations will be. It will also define how the generations will be shaped in the next generation process. Okay, yes. So here we see some of the iterations. ID to 11, probably it means in the, this design option belongs to the second generation and the 11th individual. And we can see some of the fitness values here, like what is the road surface, what is the ratio of public green surface. I mean, maybe, okay, so this is not the fitness values, but these are some of the data that they present. Also, we have this option in Wallacei, which is very cool. You can also add data to your component, and you can also while the algorithm is defining, sorry, not defining, while the algorithm is checking the results in terms of their fitness values, also it prints these data, and you can, maybe you want to minimize some of the factors that you selected, but you also at the end want to see, I don't know, like the project cost, and you want to decide between each generation which is the less costed one, and then you can have the data option to see that. So yeah, in this case, you can see how the generations are evolved with changing graphs and everything. And then at the end, we see that in the 1908 generation and the individual 85, they selected this one, and then we also see some perspective views and everything. So I'm not sure after that point if they make any kind of interaction, like from a designer point of view, or if they took it from directly what comes from the machine. But it looks like a, you know, like a conventional project, right? It's, I mean, it has some road hierarchy and then some kind of placement and everything, and you can directly also see the cost and everything as well. So another cool project from the Autodesk, I don't want to this time dive into every detail of this project, but there is this is a different scale. This is mostly interior, not just interior, but also like they have a defined space here, a building, and then they are defining where the working space will be, and what kind of properties it's going to have. Like first they're again defining the goals, and then defining some elements, And then, of course, there is an approach how you will place those working areas and everything. And then you have the generative design process and the chart as well. But what I want to show you is this very nice clip they prepared, because it's a very nice summary how the whole generative design process works. I hope it's not going to be lagging a lot, thus you can see it better. I think they also have some documentation about this project as well in the Autodesk website, and they are using Dynamo, I guess, in this case, instead of Grasshopper. We have the same cycle. First, we have the constraints, and then we generate in the first step. So we see that they are at the beginning, they're giving some decisions how the overall design approach will be, and then giving the machine this freedom to search in that space, right? And then second phase is the evaluation, which takes into consideration of the fitness values. And in this case, they have really like interesting fitness values. For example, work style preference is quite interesting to define as a numeric parameter. I don't know all the details of how they define it, but it's quite interesting. Also, like productivity. I mean, daylight is much easier to evaluate, right? Because you have an actual analysis, and then you know the mathematical values of the daylight of a closed space. But when it comes to social factors, it's always fun to think about them. So this is also a cool part of this video, like how they clustered all these thousands of design options. If these tools wouldn't allow us to, you know, go with this, like navigating between these algorithms, the generations easily, it would be really hard us to evaluate our design, because we are simply creating a lot of options, and it needs to be somehow clustered, somehow analyzed within the program. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so efficient to use them. So yeah, this is, I was thinking it's an interesting project, and I think I didn't put any other image, from the project, but in the end, the result is very also, you wouldn't think this result came from a machine iteration process, I guess, if you would see it in the first place. You can check more of the images from their website, and yeah, have a look. Okay, so one of the last project that I want to show you is called Back to Beira, which is from my master final studio, and also related to my thesis as well. So a little bit, let's first give a bit background about this project. So the concept of the project was called Design Within the Limits of Scarcity, because this project was in Mozambique, and in, I think, 2009 2019, there has been a huge catastrophic cyclone in there. And at the end of this cyclone, like thousands of people have lost their lives, and also more of them just lost their homes. And there has been a huge crisis and like immediate crisis to relocate all these refugees back to the Beira. So you can see how the devastating effect from the previous image, and you can see the location of the Beira. So it was in the middle of everything in this case. And those are some photos from the actual habitants from there. We actually like from online we talk with some of the inhabitants living in there, and they send us some of the photos and the effects of this cyclone. And many of them were living in the tents until they have a proper place to live. So anyway, in this research in the project studio, we had to come up with something with a lot of limitations. So in this case, we thought it's a good idea to use these genetic algorithms, right? Because first of all, Beira is a city where you don't have a lot of, let's say, typology or regulations or anything, because you know, in some of the cities that we're living, we already have some kind of order and some kind of typologies, and there are a lot of restricted and designed layouts. But here, it wasn't the case. So we had to come up with our own typology, our own set of rules and everything. So first, we started with a matrix, and we define our goals, what we want to do in this case. And also the efficiency was very important in this case, because, you know, you're in a you're in a zone where you need to use everything, right? You can't be you know, losing some of the like, let's say you need to have the benefit of the sun in the maximum way, or you need to, in this case, of course, it was in Africa, and you need to protect yourself from the sun, but then you should maximize your passive strategies in order to, you know, blockade the sun and everything. So first, what we did was, as I said, creating a matrix and dividing our goals, which means our fitness values, into 3 categories, and which are social, environmental, and economical factors, right? And this is because this is the actual definition of sustainability. In a sustainable way of creating things, you have to cover all these layers together. So in social, you have to be sustainable. Also in environmental and economic, you have to try to make your project sustainable. So as you can see, we can go through a couple of them. Like we were hoping to increase the people interaction. We were hoping to increase connectivity in the neighborhood that we are developing, increasing comfort range, which was one of the main important factors, because, as I said, this was in Africa, and this solar radiation was a major factor. And also increasing urban density, which is the 4th fitness value, was really important, because we had a site, let's say before the cyclone, let's say you could locate 1,000 people, but after the cyclone, you have to relocate it 2,000 or more people. So every inch of the area is really important. And list goes on like this. I'm not gonna continue with all of them, but then after you define these fitness values, you need to take some actions to make them real, right? So in this case, we called them criteria, and we took some actions. I mean, we defined some actions for our algorithm to make these goals real, right? So, for example, in the first one, we thought if we minimize the amount of the turns on the shortest paths, we're going to achieve some of the goals. Like, we may increase the people interaction because we will have less amount of turn, and there will be, you know, more, let's say, interaction in terms of road connection and as well. And we can increase the urban density as well, because when you start to divide in plots, you're losing some space, right? When you have less division, you will have more place for the volumes. So also the criteria list goes on like this. And as I mentioned, in this case, defining social factors as a parameter is always a controversial topic. Like you can say, by minimizing the amount of turns, you are not actually increasing the people interaction, and you should somehow convince people that is the way that you selected, and you should explain your reasons and everything. And also this kind of matrix thing is reference from a paper. You can see the reference down below. You can also have a look at it. So we didn't come up with this idea, but we have research and find a nice example, and then we evolve it in our design process. And then this is an important step, because what we're going to do for tomorrow will be relatively similar. Of course, there are a lot of different things, but it's important to understand the mindset of this process. So you can see first we had a site in which we divided into equal amount of grids. In this case, I guess they were like 6 by 6 meters for something. I don't quite remember. It has been a long time from this project. And then we scattered points over those grids. In this case, we were using the populate component in Grasshopper. And then we created, by using those scattered points, we created some sort of pattern in order to create our building plots, right? I'm not going to dive the details of it, because in our case, we were going to be performing something similar, as I told you. Anyway, and then we defined some of the places to approach our sites. I mean, some of the points we think they are going to be like the continuing parts of the existing roads in the urban environment. And we defined the shortest paths from there. And we wanted to create a nice central space for the community living in there. And then once we have a pattern, of course, we used boundary surfaces in order to have some buildings, but also we defined the ratio, because obviously we don't want the whole ground space as a building, right? We need some also like void spaces in order to have some kind of, like, I don't know, any kind of public spaces and everything. And then once we have a 3D in the ground floor, once we have extruded them, then we also applied this way of creating pattern also in the other floors. But of course, when you apply the same rules in each floor, then you have a lot of buildings that are floating in the air, right? So in the next step, we were eliminating those buildings. And then once we have, let's say, more feasible kind of settlement, we also give a decision that we want to eliminate the central buildings more, because we want this building structure as a also protective kind of body from the wind that is coming from the ocean. So if we have a less amount of floor in the middle part, that part will be more comfortable in terms of wind and everything, because these other buildings will have a protective factor to them. And then we run the genetic algorithm, and we have some of the fitness values displayed in here, like we see that what is the result for the sun radiation, winter sun, and everything. And this was the master plan that's come up from the algorithm. And in this research project, we tried to really keep the intervention in the minimum level, because we wanted to see what can we actually, how far we can go with the machine itself without putting ourselves into design process. But of course, we couldn't use that directly. We had to give some decisions. So you can see from transition from algorithm to the real proposal, we gave some decisions, like we defined some places for the courtyards of the building. So you can also see in the left below part as orange, you can see how we defined buildings, some kind of clustering. And then also we eliminate some of the buildings along the roads that we thought they are going to be the main roads and the main approaches to our side and central space. Yeah, this is more like some kind of simple diagrams. It shows both isometrically and also in the section, which is funny and simple, but you can see there are a lot of like in between spaces all around these buildings. And also we had to define some regulations as well in going upper levels. For example, we were reducing the square meters, and also in the top floor we had a bigger footprint because then we would block the sun as much as possible. And also in this scenario tab, you can see, which is quite interesting, in Africa, we have been informed that you have to also think about the future development of this place, right? I mean, of course, in every area, you should also consider that. But in Africa, it's a bit more extreme because, I mean, I can't generalize the whole Africa, but in this case, the Beira, because when you define for people how they can further expand their kind of building plots or their houses, they have more valuable spaces. So in this case, first we run a genetic algorithm and we come up with an ideal solution. Let's say this is a representation of it. And then we also abstractly showed how they can furtherly expand their buildings, still keeping the fitness values in a range, this will be useful for them. So this was also a nice practice as well. And then we dive into floor plans and everything, but I'm not gonna go with them all. And yeah, this was the final result, rendering, how it looks like. So of course, everything has to be very primitive with primitive technologies. We have to use what we have in this site itself. And also for us, it was very interesting that in terms of people scale, how the algorithm created something which is very convincing in some parts. I mean, for us, it was like this, and for the professors and everyone. I don't know in your side, but yeah. And okay, almost going to an hour. Let's be a bit quicker. I want to also show some software and tools in a very quick way. So there are some generative design tools that are occurring in those days. For example, TestFit is one of them. When we were writing our thesis, we were checking the programs. They are mostly for real estate developers and the clients that want to, quickly analyze how profitable size and everything, but also from an architectural perspective, they're pretty interesting, I guess, because you can just draw a couple of lines and then you have a building and you can see how much does it cost, how much parking areas you have, and you can easily manipulate it and put your own typology inside this building and it will automatically change everything for you. And also Archistar, I think this is like one of the big ones. So it also has the what is called, like, it has a lot of data about the place itself. I think it's only right now in America, the United States, but you can like see a lot of info about the site when you click on the land, and then you can see what kind of possible actions you can take, what kind of building you can generate, and easily you can generate in a very quick way. And one of the other is called Digivo. This is not a commercial software, but it is more like I think it's academical research. This is also developed by the some of the researchers. One of them is Koenig, which we spoke about in the first phase of our presentation as well, when Rıdvan was showing you the DLA algorithms and their integrations with urban typology. Koenig also had a paper. And then also they have this kind of generative design tool, which is actually working in Rhino Grasshopper. So I think you can download it and give it a try on your computer as well. I'm not sure, I didn't try, but you can check it out. And also they have this, if you don't know, Decoding Spaces Toolbox website, they have like massive amount of workshops, everything, like really interesting stuff that you can dive into. If you didn't know, I strongly suggest you to check it out. And finally, what we are going to do today is we are going to use a evolutionary algorithm tool, which is called Wallacei. But there are also two others that I know, which is one of them Octopus and the other one is Discover. But I personally haven't used them, and I think Wallacei is a bit more comprehensive, but I'm not quite sure. So you can have a look at them as well if you are curious about it. And you can find the references in this presentation. I'm going to upload it as a PDF on the shared drive as well. And yeah, let's say this is enough for introduction. And first, I think if you guys have some questions, we can have them, and then we can give another break, this time a small break, and then we can dive into Grasshopper. Okay. I was thinking it's going to be shorter. Sorry if it was a too long presentation.
I thought it was really interesting. I mean, it's my first time seeing it as well. The projects were quite interesting. I found the Autodesk one, your project as well. The part where you show the goals and criteria.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think a little bit about, I mean, we talk a lot about this, what's the role of the designer when the computer is taking so much responsibility. And in your project, as well as the Autodesk project, there was, I mean, the designer defines the entire system and then leads it into the generative algorithm. So the designer still has a lot of power in definition of how the algorithm is going to go, and then at the end as well with the additions and selections and etc. And this boundary, defining the boundary between the computer and the designer, is really interesting.
Yes, I pretty much agree with you. We were also discussing about this a lot, like how the designer role will change in the future, right? Because right now we are having a paper and drawing everything on it, but this is a method which comes from, you know, long, very early times. But right now, maybe like a computer scientist also will be a decisive factor in the design as well, because we have capabilities of using these algorithms as an architect, as a designer, and this also limits our thinking, right? Because if you are really good at computer, then you can define your parameters in a better way, or like your design constraints and everything. But if you have a really like limited amount of skills, then also the instrument itself starts to limit you. So this is always an interesting topic to think about it, I guess.
Yeah.
And for those who are participating, what they think about it, do they have any comments or questions?
I do have a question, which is very specific and not related to the topic of genetic algorithm. So apologies in advance. At some point in your project, you showed a grid where you scattered some points.
Mhm.
And the next step, you ended up with a perfect tiling of buildings, orthogonal buildings, you know, like a Tetris game.
Yes, I'm gonna share it back just a sec.
The question is, how did you get from a bunch of points to a perfect tiling of buildings?
Actually, I'm glad that you asked it. I think you're speaking about
Exactly,
the third
exactly.
one. Okay.
Yes.
So that is the exact same thing that we are going to learn tomorrow in our DLA algorithm. So I mean, I mean, not the exact same thing. We are going to repeat the process like again, but this time we are not going to be using scattered points. We are going to be using our DLA algorithm in this case, and then we will create our this tile of pattern, you know.
And will it look like this this pattern that you're showing on your screen, or will it be different?
It depends. I mean, the overall result will be looking like this, but the scale and let's say results of obviously going to be different. And also, if we have time, we can also try with a different typology as well, like Voronoi maybe, and then it will be completely a different typology in this case, like a different tile of you know fabric. But yes, we are gonna dive into that tomorrow.
And in this case, particularly, did you use also the DLA algorithm, or was it different?
No, I had no idea about DLA in this time. I think actually this is a very like a simple operation that's you're going to find the answers tomorrow. That's why I'm not going to dive into details. Just keep in mind that we are gonna go there. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So if we don't have any other question in chat, we have something. Okay. Do we give a break before going to today's final part? Like 7 minutes break, maybe?
Yep.
Okay.
Skill break.
Cool. Then see you soon.
Nice. See you guys.
So let's get started with the final part of today. Let me find where we left in the presentation first. Okay. Okay, so we are gonna dive into Grasshopper again, but this time we are not going to be working on DLA algorithm. Instead, we were going to work on a simple example file that I prepared for you guys. So first, as a first step, let's go to our drive folder, and in that drive folder, in the participants folder, I think in materials and Grasshopper, we have superblocks files, and there we have another file called 1000 iterations, and let's download it. And it says digital future instead of digital. Oops. And let's open it. And before we dive into Wallacei, I would like to ask you guys, how many of you previously used it or have some ideas about it, or is it the first time that you're going to use this software or tool? First time, okay, nice. Okay, I think it's a relatively new tool, so that's normal. So, okay. But did you guys able to install it, or also in the Wallacei you are having some difficulties to run it as well? I mean, you can obviously just watch and then practice as well, but it would be nice to know. Okay, I'm gonna assume there is no problem. Okay. Let's take our presentation file as a guidance. I'm assuming that everyone has downloaded the example file and managed to open it. And then let's dive into details of the script. So, okay, I have two screens, so I don't know how to do this, but I think that, nope. Okay, yeah. Nope. Okay, I put it in the wrong screen. Okay, right now it's fine, I guess.
Yep.
Let's go in the isometric view to have a better sense. And let's close this grid. We don't need it. Okay. Okay. So let's close everything in this display. But why do I still have it? It's weird. Oh, okay, this is the correct one. Sorry. Now if I die, yes, okay. Right now we are good. All right. So what we have is here, I just created a simple script in order to practice our first optimization. So what I do here is first we have a plane, and then based on this plane, we are creating a grid structure 3 by 3, and all these squares have, let's say, 100-meter distance. And then we are offsetting these grids in order to have our building plots, you see, and streets in between them. And then we are populating some points by using populate 2D component. And then we are, okay, before than that, we also have another rectangle component here, which creates 9 different rectangles in order to make courtyard spaces for our building plots.
Can I quickly just say one thing?
Yeah.
I believe you have to make sure that the Rhino is in meters and not millimeters. Is that correct? Because mine was in millimeters and I was having some
Let's check.
issue.
Yes, it's in meters.
Okay. I'm not sure if that was the issue, but just in case.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it's good to point that out. In any case, right now we are just, going to hang out with the numbers and just use it as a tool to learn optimization. Okay, anyway, by the way, is it solved when you turn it to meters, or is it still in a different scale?
I think my Rhino is having a bit of an issue. I'm going to restart it. It's okay. But if no one else is having issues, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said, we are creating rectangles for each building plot, and then we are using a simple move operation with 2-point vector. And you can see we are, oops, not this one, but this one. Yeah, we are taking our courtyards based on the center points of each rectangle and moving them to the center points of each building plot. Okay. And then we have this population, which is based on just random non-random points. And we are using a curve closest point in order to project these points in our curves in the courtyard. And also we have a secondary curve closest point component. And with this one, we are projecting our points this time on our building plot. So we have a same operation with different curves. And why are we doing that is, I mean, this is obviously just a simple example. So there are millions of different ways to create our building typology. But I want to here put a bit randomness to this generation process. That's why I'm using population. So you might have better ways to do that. It's okay. And then we are creating a line. And with those lines, we are making first we are making a surface, and then we are splitting those surface with those lines. And we are having our fragmented parts, right? So we can call all these fragmented parts our buildings. Okay. And then we need to extrude those surfaces to make them as building, right? So what I do here is using a series component and starting with a initial number, which can be in this case 4 meters, and we have 4 steps which allow us to have 4 step variation sorry, 4-meter distance between each variation, and we have 6 variation in this case. And we want to put randomness into this extrusion phase. We don't want them to go in a rhythmic way, like 4, 8, 12, 16, like, because, you know, in the series, what you get is something like this, you know. That's why we're repeating that data first. But of course, when we are repeating it, we also want to be sure that we have the exact same of amount data with our buildings, right? So you can see we have 57 fragmented parts, and we have 57 data as well. and then in the end, we're just jittering and shuffling that list. Therefore, we don't have the same kind of rhythmic rising each time. Okay, so after that, so this is the initial function for setting our, let's say, rules, right? And also that we have some variables here, which is maybe in the next step I go with them. So okay, let's go with them now. So these are the remember in the presentation we were speaking about the initialization phase, right? When we are creating a genetic algorithm. So this is our initialization phase. You can see that, for example, in this gene pool, it is called WLC building count. So this, what it does is, you can see, maybe with also this, it's a bit easier to see that. When I change this component, I mean this gene pool, my building count is changing as well. So in this initialization phase, I'm already defining a parameter which is corresponding to my design problem, right? And I'm doing this with the gene pool or with a slider, because in optimization, those are the components that we can use to later evolve our design. So also we have like X and Y values of the courtyard areas. And then we have a seat. I believe it's for, yeah, shuffling the jitter. So whenever we, do we have an extrusion here? Yes, we have. Let me show it. So in this extrusion, whenever I change this randomness seat, I have a different kind of, you know, rhythm. Okay, so whatever is here defining my design proposal. And once I have a design proposal, then I am continuing with defining my fitness values, right? Because in order to, you know, evaluate my design, I need to know which indicators I'm going to use. And in this case, we have three fitness values, which is the volume, maximum amount of volume, I mean, total amount of volume that we have. The variance, I believe this is for, no, okay, this is for area. So the variance is helping us to homogenize our areas. So what it does is it calculates all the square meters in this super block. And at the end, we are going to try to minimize variance, because when we minimize it, the list is getting closer to each other. So we can go into details of in the next script when we are working in DLA. So right now I'm not going into details a lot. And also the latest one, which is minimizing courtyards. So we have our courtyard as boundary surfaces. And then we are just calculating the area and putting a mass addition and plugging it to a number parameter. So this is just a number component. And then I just changed the name to minimize courtyard. So you can see there is a certain kind of pattern in these components, because we have to give them minimize, starting with minimize or maximize text, because this is how the Wallacei understand we need to minimize this value. So if you don't say anything, I'm not sure how it reacts. Like probably it's either defaultly minimizing everything unless you write maximize, or is it shuffling? I don't know. I didn't try, but if you want, let's say if we want to maximize courtyard, we should write the name here in the maximize, and then the Wallacei will understand what we want with it. Anyway, so let's go with the Wallacei component then. So this is the main component that Wallacei provides us. You can see, okay, also let's check the our steps in order to not miss anything. Okay, so we are in the right spot. So you can see that there are 4 inputs, which are first the genes, which is the which comes from the initialization phase. In this case, are sliders and gene pools. Our objectives, which are going to define our fitness values. Data is any kind of numeric data that we can insert. It doesn't depend what it is. Like it can be, as I previously said, a cost component or a simple measurement or anything. And the phenotype is, this is something very important and very useful in Wallacei. Normally, in order to evolve our design, we need to create first our phenotypes, and then we should evaluate in order according to fitness values, and then we go back and recreate our phenotypes at the end of this operation. But in Wallacei, you really don't have to put your phenotype in the beginning. So that's why you can see this. This is like a first phenotype that I have. So first generation that I have, but I'm disabling it, not opening it in the beginning, because this is like the most time consuming thing in our script, right? I mean, this is a pretty, let's say, light script, but in a complex design problem, this phenotype creation phase could be really a thing that forces our computer. So it's nice that we don't need that in the beginning. So what we are going to do now is first we are going to right click on Wallacei X, because this seems like a static component, but actually we can go inside. But right now when I left click it twice, I don't get anything, because in order to reach the interface, first I need to plug genes, objectives, and the data. I mean, not necessarily data, but also if we put it in the beginning, we don't forget it later. Anyway, so when you right click on it, you have 2 options here, which is select all sliders and select all objectives. So when I click select all sliders, Wallacei is smart enough to know which are my genes. So how does it do that? In our drive folder, I believe I put the primer, so we can also have a look at from there. Because anything that is related to Wallacei actually written in the primer. So I'm just going to be sharing my previous information, but if you want to dive into more, you can find anything in this primer. So here there is a nice, yes, so here there is a nice, let's say, scheme that explains what are those inputs and outputs. And also it says that when you put a WLC in the beginning of your sliders and the gene pool, oops, this wasn't the page that I want to show. It was the next one. Okay, so yes. Okay, so Wallacei automatically knows that if we have a slider which is starting with a text WLC, it's going to be a gene. And also, if we use a gene pool as well, it's going to act it in the same way. And when we have something that is based on a number component and also starting with WLC, Wallacei acted as an objective, which is going to be our fitness value. So this is pretty useful in order to, when you have, I mean, in this case, it's not a very complicated situation, but when your script gets complicated, it's nice to know this trick and write in the beginning. Thus, you don't have any problems later. Maybe you can forget later to put some of these inputs in your algorithm. It doesn't behave like you want it. So yeah, and the next phase is plugging the data. I think here I'm also using, so there is a maybe small mistake here. Okay, so as a data, I'm also plugging the variance component, which is not important. We can use anything. We can use like just square meter or whatever. It doesn't matter. We can think about it in the DLA. Right now, we are just going through the basics. Okay, so when we have this tree and not have the phenotype, we can now go into Wallacei interface. Okay, so when we open it, there's a lot of things going on here. So let's start from the settings, which is the first tab that we have. So on the left part of our screen, we see some kind of properties. Starting from population, you can see there are two options here that we can change. First one is the generation size, and the second one is the generation count. So when you multiply these values, you can have the population size, which means that if I right now start this optimization algorithm, it's gonna stop when it reaches to 5,000 populations. So in this case, we can say we don't want that amount of result because it's going to be time consuming, but we can try and see how much time it's taking and everything, and we can change these numbers. So in each generation, we are going to have 50 results, and we will have 100 different generation throughout this exploration process with these values. And the next one is the algorithm.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Before we keep going, maybe if there are some questions.
Yes, sure.
Maybe we can have them.
Or if you're able to get into here, like, do you see the interface as well? Or are you preferring to just watch and not to perform anything?
One question I had was the phenotype. The phenotype is just the kind of the output of the generation, right?
Exactly.
And like, what these genes result in, kind of.
Exactly. So what those genes define is our design solution, right? So when we have, let's say, what was that? So building count. So I think it starts from this left bottom part. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is 5. Yeah. So we have 6 buildings here, and it continues in a certain list. I'm not sure which direction, but the phenotype is, as you said, this is the first design option that comes from our initialization phase, and which is going to be act like our first generation, and then we will produce, reproduce, evaluate, transform, have mutation, and have another generation at the end. So this will, this cycle will keep like 5,000 times, as in this case, if we keep those settings. And then we're gonna have a better phenotype at the end. So we are going to still having phenotypes, but with new generations and new slider values.
Okay, and one more question is the data. So the data is just a value that's not being optimized, but
Exactly.
it's changing every step.
Exactly. So this is not affecting the algorithm. This is just an input in order to observe how, like, you know, the overall performance has changed. So it doesn't necessarily have to make any change in our evolution, but this is like just an indicator that you further want to look. For example, let me give an example. We can be using this algorithm in a facade design, right? And we might need to have a certain number of window at the end. So, but there are a lot of fitness values in this case, like what is the daylight performance of this facade, and I don't know, what is the overall performance against solar radiation and everything as well. But in the end, we also want to know how many amount of window we're going to have. So we can count data as the counting of our windows. And this is not going to be changing anything in the algorithm, but at the end, you will see that in one option, maybe you have a really good performance, but you have 100 window, but in the other one, maybe you have 150, I don't know.
Okay.
Can I ask what is the difference between Octopus and Wallacei?
Okay. Honestly, I am not expert to answer this question because I haven't really used Octopus a lot. I just saw a couple of practices, but first of all, I know Wallacei is updating a lot. So even when I was preparing this, I had some improvements in the program and I couldn't catch to recap those. So maybe it's right now, let's say, more trendy and more evolving, but I'm not quite sure, as I said. So maybe also in Octopus, we are having a lot of new developments as well. So it's better to explore it by yourself in this case. Okay. If there is no any other question, I'm gonna continue. And also one thing that I forget to mention before moving in interface is when we have our phenotype as in this case, this is a BREP geometry. It's also nice to create a mesh copy of it and entwine them together because, you know, meshes are meant to be more lighter. And in the Wallacei component, there are some specific outputs for the meshes. So when separating those data and having them differently is kind of very efficient way to use this. So let's keep it in mind. Okay, so I think we were at algorithm parameter, right? So here we have some characteristic decisions about our evolution. Starts with crossover probability and mutation probability, right? So we spoke about these terms in the presentation where we were explaining the natural selection, right? So these values are between 0 and 1. I mean, the crossover probability and the mutation probability. And these are like defining how many percentage of the solutions in the generation will reproduce in the next generation. So I think in this workshop, we are not going to be changing any of these variables, but in further on in your studies, you might want to dive into those properties as well, because right now we are going to be trying to seeing the effects of our design decisions, in this case, our genes, how they are evolving, how they help us to evolve our design. But once you decide on your, once you fix your genes, then you can also come to your algorithm parameters, and then you can say, okay, let's try to change the crossover probability as well. Maybe we're going to have a better search space and everything. So, and this will also affect your evolution. And in mutation probability, this is defaultly 1/n, and n is here the counting of the genes. So this is a suggestion from the paper that is based on the optimization algorithm, which is called, I guess, NGSI2 or something. So we have this paper also in our drive folder. I think Wallacei is using that approach in the optimization phase. So if you're curious about it, you can also have a look at it. And basically in this paper, it says in the mutation probability, the best ratio is keeping it 1/n, but then you are also free to change this without unpicking it. And then next we have crossover and mutation distribution index, which are the like the percentage of mutation taking place in the generation, and sorry, this was the mutation probability. Sorry for the wrong reference. And this distribution index are when they are higher, you are having offspring solutions from the parents. When they are smaller, you have more distant solutions in the children's solutions. So again, in these four variables, we are not going to change a lot, but also in the random seed, this is important to know. So, you know, in grasshopper components, when we have a random seed, it always replicates the same rhythm, right? So when you have a random seed as 1, every time it will create the same pattern. What we see in the DLA algorithm was also similar to that. So also Wallacei, in Wallacei, when you have random seed as like here as 1, then when you start your population, each time it will start with the same order. But you can also change that to 2, 3, or whatever you want, and your randomness will change. And also, if you write 0 here, then each time this algorithm runs, it's gonna start with a different random seed. So this is highly unrecommended because we want to know we're controlling our evolving phase. We don't want to have each time a different kind of population creation, because if we do that, we don't know if our, let's say, changes in the genes, what kind of effect they have done in our evolution. We can never know that. So it's highly recommended to keep it as in the 1 or 2 or whatever you started with it, and go with like this. Okay. So in the next tab, we have simulation parameters, which shows a great amount of information. So here we can see we have 28 genes here. We have something in, okay, Louis, thanks. I just saw your comment. So we have the number of genes. You can, we can prove that by checking from here. So we have 8 variables here by 3 times, so 24. And with this one, it's 25. Okay, it says 28. Okay, because these are not 8, these are 9 values. So 3 times 9, 27, and 1, 28 sliders. And within these sliders, we have almost like an 800 value. So you can increase it by, you know, putting some, you know, more search space. For example, you can change the, you know, this from an integer to floating point numbers. Then you can see like how it will change. Okay, we need to close and open it back, but yeah, you can definitely change it. And I think you just need to reopen it. I just lost my, okay. And then we have obviously 3 fitness objectives, which were the volume, courtyard area, and variance. And this is the search space. So combining those slider values with each other, you have 4.9 multiplied by 10 over 39. I think means that, so we have a bunch of space to discover our generations. And let's say we are happy with these. First, change this into a smaller value in order to make it feasible. And then we have some dynamic graph preferences, right? So these are allowing us to, when we start it, when they are in this kind of orientation, we can see dynamically how our simulation is working. And once we run it, you can see in the runtime, we have some data, right? It says the current solution. We can see that in which generation right now and how many Pareto front solutions we have in this generation. This is also an important term, which means like there are options, there are generations which are non-dominated to each other. So we can decide which one is better by just checking the values, because we have 3 values, maybe 2 of them are good, 1 of them is bad. And in other generation, other 2 of them are good, 1 of them is bad. So we can decide which generation is better in this case, right? We have to prioritize our fitness values maybe. And you see also the estimated time remaining, which is pretty close. And in the bottom of the runtime part, we have also actual simulation runtime, which is showing the actual time that the algorithm is working. And what about the other tabs? So we have a standard deviation graph here. Basically, what I can say is you can, if you see, let's say, greater span in your curve, it says there is more deviation. And if it's narrower, it's floating between closer values, you know, in your fitness values. And in the right tab, in the parallel coordinate plot, we have a very important indicator. So you can see there are 2 colors here. One of them is red and the other is blue. So what we see here is each line is representing a solution, and each y axis here as fitness objective. So fitness objective 1, fitness objective 2, and 3 we can see. And from red to the blue, we are seeing the red ones are the first generations and the blue ones are the last generations. So this is let's say a graph that we would like to see also in our simulation, because you can see all the red curves are on the top part and the blue ones are the bottom part, which means that when this optimization algorithm is running, we are having fittest, we are getting closer to our fittest values, because when it gets closer to the origin, so when the simulation finishes, we are having also a warning. So also I'm going to show it in the here in the below. It maybe makes more sense. So this is a different kind of representation what we have in the above. So you can see we have 3 axes here, and all of them are fitness objective, fitness values. And if we look from the top, so you can see that these are the first generations. So they are floating very away from our, let's say, central space, from our origin, right? But when it evolves, it gets closer to the center point. And how we can understand is from the upper part, because you can see, as I said, the red ones in the up part and the like blue ones in the below part. If it wasn't like this, I could never know that my algorithm is working properly and I'm having better results with the time. And this can be sometimes the case because maybe we are not critically think about which kind of values should be our genes, and maybe some objectives are contradictive with each other. Like when you increase, let's say, one of these fitness values, it's affecting the other two, and it might be hard for a machine to find a feasible solution in between. Before moving on, I would like to ask if there is anything unclear at this part, because most of you said your first time using it, so it might be a bit complicated, I guess, for those who see it for the first time. If you have any questions or comments. All clear? Okay, nice. Okay, then let's continue with, at least let's try to finish the interface today, because we also have some other applications as well. So it would be nice to, before finishing today, at least finishing this interface phase. Okay, so this is pretty much what is the settings. And also we have here a snap, start, stop, and reset buttons. So reset just resets everything in this algorithm. So normally when you finish it, it's always nice to go to your file and save it. Because one of the nice thing about Wallacei, when you close it and when you close your Grasshopper file, then you will see that is a blank page, right? But when you click draw entire population, you actually have your data. I mean, you're losing your dynamic charts, but it's okay if you snap it in the first place, then you will also have it as a screenshot in your desktop. So it's quite useful as well. You don't have to record any data in your Grasshopper script. Wallacei does everything for you. And the next part is the analytics, where we have an option to also evaluate our, let's say, evolutionary algorithm. So maybe here I am just going to dive only the most important parts in order to keep time efficient. So for example, here we have a fitness value chart. When you double click, also you can open it and have a better visual. So here you can see the better version of the first chart that we speak about. But in this case, each point here, each points are solutions, and each curves are generations. So it's a bit unclear, like I have a curve, but I'm not quite sure where it goes. But at least I know that with time, again, my fitness value is getting fitter because it's getting closer to the x-axis, right? So, for example, in variance, I see that the evolutionary algorithm really did a good job. But on the other hand, in the volume, it's not so clear if we evolved our design or not. It's very like entwined in a way. And also we can observe this behavior in our mean value trend line, sorry. So you can see here how it started, like our average fitness value in courtyards, and it goes, and then of course it goes, it makes some small jumps, but in general trend line it's going pretty well. And actually in also like all these three objectives, I mean the fitness values are going pretty well, but like the variance is the most smooth one, you can see. So it's easily optimized in a way, but in volume you can see there are a lot of jumps, and you can already realize that the only parameter that affects the volume was our randomness seed, right? Because if we go back to our canvas, we can see that this is the seed, which is breeding the jitter, and it is harder for Wallacei to optimize this because when you change the seed, the numbers are completely changing, and it might take a bit of more time to optimize this, because you need to test each seed and then you need to understand. But for example, in courtyards, probably the algorithm understands it better when let's open our courtyard. I think this is, yeah. So when I change my gene pool in a lower value, I have a small amount of courtyard and it's easier to understand. So by the way, you can also like go back and change anything once you have a data, so it doesn't affect it. It's not a problem. So you can see, so you can say we run an algorithm and it's not really optimizing in terms of volume, right? But this may not be true, because also in our drive folder, there are other examples with different iterations. So let me quickly also show that. Because also this is an important indicator that, where was it? Yes. Okay. So for example, we run 1,000 iterations in our case, right? In this one. Yeah. So this is the population size with 1,000 iteration, but this is the exact same operation with 5,000 variations. So you can see, let's compare them. Okay, maybe it's not a best way to compare them like this, but we can go back and forth. So you can see even here, the blue values are closer to the X value in the variance and courtyard. Especially like you can see in the courtyard here, we are still a bit unsure how it's changed, but here we can see in a better way, it's evolving and getting closer to the X-axis. And why I'm showing this is you may think you didn't create a nice algorithm, which is not optimizing your generation, but maybe the problem is your iteration size. So you can see, for example, this is the 20,000 iteration and the results are pretty nice. You can see like everything is very close to the X value, and you can see your trend lines. They're in a very good behavior, right? And if we even go further, like with a 50,000 iterations, I mean, now we start to see this is a bit unuseful to go with this, because you already had a flat line in the trend line in these parts. So after 20,000 iterations, you don't need to wait for 30,000 more. So it's a bit unnecessary. So once you get used to use your algorithm, it's always nice to also try with different iterations. First, go with lower numbers and try to understand the general behavior of your graphs, and then go with maybe if you are not satisfied with the results, you go with a greater number of solution. And also here in the analytics, we have some selection criteria. For example, we can say we would like to select our generation 1 and also the population 1, I mean, individual 1 and generation 1. It highlights where it is. And also it gives you a diamond chart with a lot of information, like what is the fitness value of it? And also you have the name of it, right? Like this is the minimizing courtyard and this is the fitness value. And you can see from 1,000 different variation, this is the 500 second ranked solution. So I believe if I go to the later generations, probably I have a better result. Let's say 9. Okay, not every time, because we see that there is this kind of randomness, but the point is when we go to the next generations, we have more fitted values. We are going to see that in this selection panel. I'm not going to try to show here everything. And also we can say that we want to have the, let's say, fittest rank in terms of our fitness values. For example, in our courtyard, let's say minimize courtyard operation, the fitness value of courtyard, we can first write here 1, the number of the fitness value, and then say the rank, the fittest rank. And you can see it says generation for the 9 and individual 3 is the fittest value in terms of courtyard minimizing, right? And also you can see the variance is also quite nice because we can't have all 3 together. But the volume is, on the other hand, pretty bad, right? It's almost like the worst value that we can have here. And you can also prove that from the diamond chart. When it gets closer to the center, it's better. So these 2 fitness values are quite nice, but on the other hand, the volume is quite bad. And if we say add this to our list, we will see in the second panel, which is the export lists, it's adding that, let's say, individual to our export list for further on that we're able to create it back in our Grasshopper canvas. Also, let's do it for the other fitness values as well. Put it in our lists. First, I need to select. No, it's actually, okay, already added. Okay. So before going to selection, I think it has been an hour. So what do you think, Ridwan? Should we, I mean, we can give like 15 minutes more for finishing this interface without giving any break, and then call it a day and, you know, start from tomorrow maybe.
Okay, sounds good to me. What do you guys think? Is that okay with 15 minutes more? All right.
Okay, because if we leave it here, we may not have a lot of time for tomorrow for everything. Okay, let me then quickly summarize what we have in the rest of the panels. So this is the analytics, right? We can close and see some of them, and you can play with them. I'm not going to dive into more. So this is, let's say, one of the most important panel in this tool. First, we need to draw our parallel coordinate plot here because it's, so in the first panel, which is in the settings, we had this parallel coordinate plot as well. But in that panel, we only had our first and last 50 generation, because this is a dynamic chart. It doesn't want to crash your computer. But when you go to the selection and if you draw parallel coordinate plot, then you will have all the generations and individuals in this chart. So we have a couple of different selection methods here. The first is the parallel coordinate plot settings, and we have 4 different, let's say, analysis methods here. Let's quickly go through with them. So if I select repeated fitness values, and if I select an object, fitness objective, this should be 1, 2, or 3, because we have 3 fitness objectives, right? And if I run this analysis, so it creates some kind of circles, and those circles represents how often this fitness value is repeated. So ideally, you can see it's getting in some parts more and more, and it's nice to see that in the very fitted part we have a lot of repetition, and also in the very beginning we see some repetitions as well. Probably maybe the algorithm stuck in some of the values and try to and I think it's gonna lead us to let's say an educated result, but then you see it changed and repeated some other values as well. So this might be an indicator to show how your algorithm is working. So this is a kind of nice let's say result that we would like to see. And one other method is solution with repeated fitness values. I'm not sure if it's going to be very useful for you, but you can say that for, let's say, the courtyard areas, I want to see which like value is repeated most. So you can see this fitness value, which is this amount of number, is repeated 19 times. So you can also try to see less repeated ones, like with growing numbers. So maybe in this case, it's not very useful, but in some other case, it might be useful as well. This is the third part, is the relative difference between fitness ranks. Could be useful because if you say 0 in this part, you see it gives you the flattest result in the chart, which means that it gives you the result where our fitness values are equally ranked. So if you are trading your fitness values equally, you might want to have that result in your, in your export list as well. So I'm also adding it to my export list because, I am equally treating that fitness values. I don't have a prior fitness value. So you can even, try to find small differences, like maybe until like 10, 15, I don't know, you can, let's try to see something with more incline. So even 100 could be nice. So let's try to see the worst one, because we did 1,000 iterations. So this is the worst one. You can see the relative difference is pretty high, even though fitness 1 and 2 is close. Third one is pretty far away. And also there is the average of fitness rank, but I'm not quite sure what it does. So I think you should check the primer if you're curious about it as well. So I'm not going to waste time that I haven't used before. The next panel is the unsupervised machine learning panel. Here we can also group our results as well. So there are specific kind of grouping techniques where you select your generation cluster and you say, I want to run this simulation, and it creates you a set of groups based on a central distance, central value, and it finds equally distributed generations in the space. So in this case, again, we are not going to be using that, but just be aware of this property as well. So you can see a nice clustering here. You can see that those generations are equally distributed along this central value. So you can change the cluster amount as well. You can see we have 5 clusters right now with color coded and everything. And then finally, we have the Pareto front solutions. We can have all of the Pareto front solutions, or if we untick it, we are going to just have the Pareto front solutions in the final generation. So generally, we use only the final one because the final generation is the closest one to the fitness value. So we can have a couple of them from our export list as well, and all, or we can have all and add to our export list. And the last part is you can also directly select a specific generation from your simulation, and you can just click some of them and add to your export list. So we can, some people just without doing any analysis in this interface, they're just exporting the last generation because it has the best fitness value in overall. But we can also looking for let's say an average value or a different kind of information. So it really depends what we need here. And one other thing is the null pool. In our case, we didn't have any, so I didn't mention about it. In our when our simulation is running, if we have this green button turn into red, it means that when you change your gene values, you're having a result that doesn't mean anything, which means that if we go back, so we have a solution, right? So if I had, let's say, 0 here, I couldn't have 0 amount of building, right? So then whenever this algorithm tries a slider value with 0, it was going to have a null. And it's the first warning for your algorithm to go back and change your settings in Grasshopper. I mean, it is not affecting your evolution. The just Wallacei ignores that result and it doesn't change any evolution, but it takes time, right? Because let's say in 1,000 different variations, if you are having 200 null results, then it's not a very efficient way to optimize, right? I mean, when we are optimizing, we also need to optimize the process as well. So, and this is the final thing. Also, there's Wallacei forum and primer to have more information about it. You can check it. It's not working right now. I don't know, maybe blocked from my internet or something like this. And once you have everything in your export list, what you have to do is now you have to enable your phenotypes and put it in your phenotype input. Because in order to export these generations, you need a phenotype in your component. Otherwise, we can even try. I think it's going to give an error. It's not going to export anything. So if we say export, yes, nothing to export because it needs an input to export it. So if we put our phenotype here, okay, and now if we click export, and it says how many individuals we have and starts the export process. And why we are doing this at the end, in a normal generation process, you could do it, for example, in the beginning, like for each phenotype, you had to reconstruct it when you're producing your generation. But with this way, you're just creating 24 of them, right? Instead of doing this 1,000 times. So when the export is finished, we can see that we have our phenotypes in the output right now. So after that, we need to, okay, let's check where we are. Okay, we have seen those. Okay, we need to pass the exporting phase, but it's gonna take some actions to do that. So I think it's better if we stop here right now and tomorrow morning we directly start from our canvas and export these results into, you know, our Grasshopper interface as well. And then we will, we already analyzed the results. So we will go back to DLA and just a bit small peek here. Then we will start creating our urban fabric and then creating our objective functions, running again, analyzing and trying with different fabric. So let's stay here, as I said. And if you have any questions, let's go through them, and tomorrow we're going to be scripting again. Is it all clear until now? Are we good? Okay. Okay. If you have, I think in 1 or 2 hours I can upload. It doesn't take really a lot of time. If you want to watch it today or some other time, just for your information. And if you have any questions, just, you know, jump anytime. Nice. I'm excited too. Okay, then we call it a day. Thank you, everyone, and also thank you, Ridwan, for finishing the first session, for the nice work session, the first session.
And thank you for starting the second session. Actually, I wasn't aware that Wallacei could do so much.
Mhm.
There's so much tools. it
Yeah,
provides.
we really, you know, we have a very dense and small amount of time, but we could go in more deeper, and we could talk about all the selection methods and everything as well. There's a bunch of useful things that you can do. I think it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
Okay, so tomorrow at 10 o'clock again, we're going to be meeting on a Sunday. And take care until tomorrow, and see you guys.
Thank you, guys.
See you, everyone.
Bye bye.